Hi guys. Today we're going to talk about eating and swallowing as it relates specifically to our neuropopulation. This is also known as Deanna's favorite ADL. You guys know that I'm a big fan of Simply Bell ice cream and just eating in general. So it's going to be fun. You're going to learn a lot. I'm also planning to have an additional kind of video resource for you guys from some SLP friends of mine. So the speech therapists are they are really inept at this stuff. They get a lot more training than we do. So I'm also going to have a reference for you guys to check out about that because I want you to have their professional opinions as well and what they kind of want. Like, what does this was my question that I posed to him was I said, what does an SLP wish that an OT knew about eating and swallowing? And so I've got their responses and I'm going to work on putting those together for you guys so that you get that piece as well. Also in your Canvas module is a practice position paper on what is OT's role with eating and feeding. And it states in there that we can do a lot. We can do pretty much all this stuff. So let's just jump right in and we'll cover it as we go. Okay. So you'll see that this stuff is coming out of chapter 27 of your Pedretti text. These are the things that we're going to discuss today, is to be able to know the stages of normal eating and swallowing. So to be able to determine any kind of treatment for dysfunction, you first have to know normal and typical function, right? So that's nothing new. Also, we're going to describe the role of OT in eating and swallowing assessments. We're going to talk about the identification process of food and liquids. The ID progression of foods and liquids for dysphagia. And that's going to be like our modified diets and textures, thickened liquids, that sort of thing. And then we'll talk about proper positioning for safe feeding and swallowing, because that is a big area that they're going to look to OT for. Okay. All right. So then moving right into it, I'm going to post my disclaimer alert. And so this is right out of your textbook. It says continuing education and special training are required for treatment of dysphagia. And so that's something that I want you guys to just know, heads up, right up front, is that if this is something that really interests you, have at it, go tackle it. But get some additional CEUs and some certification and training in this area. Okay, so it is covered by a Practice Act, but I want you guys to get more knowledge and more certification specialization in this area should you decide to pursue it. Okay. All right, let's jump into the OT stuff. So OT factors to consider. I didn't realize my face was going to cover up those pictures. Let's move me. Okay. So OT factors to consider: psychological, social interaction, environment, culture. So if we were in class, I would be calling on you and I would say, so name some of these factors. How are these things involved in the practice of eating? And these pictures are going to kind of cue you. So up there on the top right is the Nathan's hot dog eating competition. So that is not only, that's not just a leisure and he's not just feeding himself and eating for leisure and just to get nutrition at that point, right? Like that's a serious part of his life and his hobby and occupations, all that good stuff. Then we have a family, an Indian family who is eating on the ground and they're eating without utensils. So some different cultural aspects there. I've got Norman Rockwell down on the bottom. They're serving the Thanksgiving turkey, and we've got the social aspect where all the generations gathered around and labored over that food, and then they're going to have a lot of conversation. A lot of life is going to happen around that table, right? And then we've got basically like the lady and tramp. Oh, I don't know if she's a tramp. I shouldn't have said that. But the prom couple over here that is way too romantic, and I don't even know if he's feeding her, but also the social interaction and just the different aspects that I want you guys to think about that happen around feeding and eating. Okay. All right, I'm going to move myself back over. Okay, so more factors to consider, and this is from your OT practice framework, right? So performance skills, motor and praxis, sensory and perceptual, emotional regulation, cognitive skills. And so just stopping there, if we're talking about a meal, what would emotional regulation look like if we're eating. Maybe that's where Deanna says, you know what, I shouldn't eat that whole gallon of Bluebell ice cream, even though I like it. And I've just had a really long day at work and I'm stress eating and the bachelor's on. I should probably control my emotions and realize that I should set that aside. So maybe that's what emotional regulation looks like in that aspect. Also, for motor and praxis, does our person that we're helping, do they have tremors so severely that they can't get that the bowl of chicken and dumplings, or the spoonful of chicken and dumplings, up to their mouth because it's spilling and shaking so severely? That would be a motor concern that we would be able to hopefully help them with. Sensory and perception issues. Think about the visual perception issues, and then also think about the sensory issues of just feeding and taste, right? So if someone has had a neurological insult like a stroke, some kind of infarct like that, maybe they've got some sensory loss on that side of their face. Maybe they're not going to have that feeling and that sensation that's going to allow them to even maybe be able to taste that food, right? Or control be able to gauge the temperature of it. So that may be a consideration that we need to help them have. As far as cognitive skills, are they aware and able to make the decisions about what kind of food that they like? Do they know what their preferences are? Or are they going to pick up that carrot and say, what's this? Do I brush my hair with this? And, go all Ariel in The Little Mermaid or something, So a lot of OT related specific factors to consider with eating and feeding. Okay, so take a look at all those and kind of recognize and kind of start to play into what do those look like specific to a client, and then how does that relate to their diagnosis, and then how would I actually intervene and help them with that. Okay, so then let's talk about the difference between feeding and eating. So not synonymous terms, but pretty simple if we break it down. Okay, so feeding is the process of setting up, arranging, and bringing food or fluids from the plate or cup to the mouth, sometimes called self-feeding. And that's what I would encourage you guys to kind of trigger in your mind, would be the term self-feeding. Okay, and so that is essentially bringing that food to your mouth. Okay, and then eating is what happens once the food is in your mouth. So that is keeping and manipulating the food or the fluid in your mouth and then being able to successfully swallow it. Okay, so feeding is from the plate to your mouth. Eating is what happens once it's in your mouth. And you all will see that this is where OT and speech tend to divide. Okay, and so if you ask somebody what they think that the role would be, this is where they would differentiate that. They'll say, well, OT is going to help us with the positioning and helping us get the patient's food to their mouth, and then speech is going to handle whatever happens after. Does it have to be that way? No. But some facilities, some different clinicians have different guidelines that helps them from keeping their practice area separate. So that's something where you all would just come in as you're a new team member, and you would differentiate those roles and talk through that. Okay. Also, I want you guys to know that I Googled a picture of feeding. I was just looking for somebody taking food, on a utensil to their mouth. And the picture that came up was a bat. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, like of all the feeding and eating things, the undercooked bat. And I was just like, that's Corona crazy, right? So eat anything you want as long as it's not an undercooked bat, for goodness sakes, okay? All right, moving on into swallowing. So, swallowing and dysphagia. Dysphagia is the term that means difficulty swallowing. I made sure that I got my pronunciation correct here, and it seems like the majority say dysphagia, as in like Asia is the country. Some folks will say dysphagia, sounds fancier. But for the most part, it sounds like dysphagia is the winner, okay? And this has a serious neurological implication to it. The causes of dysphagia are going to be your infarct, your traumatic brain injury, a CVA, Guillain-Barré, anoxia, where they had some kind of infarct happen and they didn't get that oxygen supply to their brain, right? Huntington's disease, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, ALS, we've talked about that recently, Parkinson's, myasthenia gravis. And so swallowing difficulty can happen, or that dysphagia can happen in any of the stages of swallowing, in the oral, the pharyngeal, or the esophageal stages. Okay, and so it's important not to only, it's important to think of this also in terms of eating food, but also in terms of being able to manage their saliva, being able to manage fluids, being able to manage those medicines. And so we swallow other things than just straight food. We need to be able to take those big pills that are like horse pills, right? Or at least come up with other compensatory strategies if they're not going to be able to successfully swallow those, okay? So that's what I want you to kind of think about. And that's your term there for the difficulty swallowing is dysphagia. All right, moving along to symptoms of dysphagia. Now, this is a pretty little picture. And it's got some good information. I don't want you to think that it is inclusive. So I want you to be sure to reference your text as well. But these are some symptoms of dysphagia that are common. And you guys went into those, the facilities, the skilled nursing facilities and the ALFs, and you observed a meal. And a lot of you all in your papers told me that you witnessed things like this. You saw people choking on food or drink. You saw them having difficulty. They were coughing after they would take a bite, and after they would swallow, you would hear them cough almost immediately. Some of you told me that, a few people, I think, told me that somebody actually had to cough something up and kind of spit it out. That's not good, right? Also, signs would be having a weak or soft voice, right? And so maybe they're not able to project that strong voice. Also aspirating or getting food or liquid into your lungs. And we're going to talk about that. We've talked about it in class before, but we're going to talk about it again in detail, okay? Also then moving to the other side, the top there, excessive saliva or drooling. And that's a sign that they're not able to swallow and manage that saliva efficiently, right? Difficulty chewing. And why are they having difficulty chewing? Okay, we'll talk more about that. But I mean, maybe their dentures don't fit. Maybe they don't have dentures. Maybe they can't feel that side of their mouth, so they're not even aware that they need to chew more on that side. Maybe they're exhausted from chewing. Maybe we got them some meat that was just too hard. If you guys had ever tried my cooking, at some point I've made a pot roast and it was too dry and too tough and you felt like a cow chewing its cud where you were just like exhausted from chewing it, right? And so you don't want to do that. But just think about if they're having to chew and chew and chew, I get tired of that. It takes muscle and it takes a lot more effort, and that can actually lead to decreased weight. Because of the exhaustion and the effort that it takes just to be able to sustain themselves and to get the correct amount of calories and the nutrition that it takes for their body. Also, food sticking in your throat. You'll hear that as a term that people will say, oh, there's food stuck in my throat. And you'll see them kind of massaging and they're kind of trying to work it down. So those are some common symptoms of dysphagia, some things that you might see with an individual. And I think that a lot of you have already seen some of that from our meal observation time. Okay, so a review of the anatomy of what's involved in the swallowing. Let's see if I can put myself up here, get out of the way. Okay, so in the next slide, we'll talk about the 4 stages of the swallow. But as far as this, it takes 48 pairs of muscles to be able to perform an effective swallow, okay? 6 cranial nerves and cranial nerve segments. This is an aspect that happens, it comes from your brainstem to be able to follow and have a normal functioning swallow. And it's something that we just take for granted. We swallow our own saliva. We swallow a drink of our iced coffee and we don't think anything about it. But if this were to become an area, after we had some sort of insult, some sort of brain infarct, a neurological insult, this is an area of concern, okay? And it can lead to serious difficulty, right? So what you see here is the green, and that's the bolus of food. So that's whatever, say you took a bite of your peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and the bread and all the things in your sandwich has combined now with your saliva, and it's formed what we call a bolus.